The sweet, sweet taste of exploitation. Why is it always so good? I'm starting with a kind of fun, friendlier face. We see an art installation of the comically large LV bag here on the Shanghai waterfront with the tall buildings of Pudong in the background. And we'll circle back here by the end. But the very toothsome quality of being on the advantageous end of class relations has been on my mind for a while now, ever since I did a video about these Better in China videos, in particular one by The Foreigner Life, where he said that even McDonald's in China tasted better than the United States. 76 years ago, a man surnamed Liu, given name Xiaoqi, went to the northern port city of Tianjin for what we would now call a kind of political tour. A meet and greet, maybe. He was an old comrade, a high-ranking member of the Chinese Communist Party, a former labor organizer, and would become the president of the People's Republic of China. And in the spring to summer of 1949, the Civil War was still ongoing, but victory was in sight. And he was preparing. And on his trip, with reporters in tow, he visited some factories, got pictures taken, gave some remarks, spoke to the workers and to the owners in what became a kind of infamous episode. Exploitation, he told the workers, has its benefits. These words might sound outrageous coming from the mouth of a prominent communist leader, but they were not so politically impolitic, especially in the early 1950s, and they were in line with what he was trying to do in the visit, which was in some sense to shore up support among different classes, including the business owners who would shortly be rebranded as capitalists, and try to red pill them in a sense. And here I mean to swallow the idea of revolution and to understand that actually they might have an active part to play in it. And so the workers had to understand that to a certain degree, the exploitation of their labor, of them, was not going to end. It would, in forms, continue because it brought benefits, and that is the subtitle of this TikTok. The frank recognition of this has always had some kind of a place in party discourse, at least in China, and you have to appreciate the man for his bracing public honesty. And things didn't go truly bad for the workers. In fact, the most exploited people in the 1950s were the farmers who were being brutally squeezed as part of the early plans as a way of transferring surplus to the development of industry. For the urban proletariat, these were the years when they became really a kind of labor aristocracy. But Mr. Liu's kind of politics, and especially the public discussion of these issues, would go by the wayside after about 1956, and he himself would get into a lot of trouble later for specifically these remarks. He was one of the principal targets of the Cultural Revolution beginning in 1966, and if you want to see some of the gnarliest accounts of his talks, you need to look for those printed in Red Guard pamphlets in the 1966 to 1969 range, which are indeed wild. That doesn't make them credible, but they will be different than the versions that you most easily find online. Now, to be clear, Mr. Liu was utterly fucked anyway, no matter what he did or didn't say back in 1949. It's just that these remarks became a convenient cudgel with which to crush him and showed how this kind of discourse could be weaponized and turned against someone who spoke it plainly. And indeed, all this did result in his death. But how does this relate to all of that Better in China content you may be seeing? And here we are back with Garrett Parrish, this time eating not McDonald's, but a bunch of sliced fruit delivered directly to him. Reading the reactions, I think my video failed in many ways. First, the humor was lost. It was meant to show just how funny and bizarre the whole comparative genre was. Second, I left my underlying argument and its application unclear, and that is that by choosing McDonald's, it was a case where probably anyone could understand the likelihood that it was so much better in China was pretty low, whatever this droopy-nosed course-to dipshit might say. But that's basically true and can be applied to all videos of this genre if you have enough context to deeply understand them, like I often do. Third, I didn't explain why these videos sort of bother me for reasons beyond their stupidity. Of course, they show China and its people in a really unflattering light in the sense that they seem always, in the comparative genre, inferiority driven and West obsessed and just of such low quality. And I would expect more from this guy who's been like a Disney Imagineer for a decade, where presumably your job is about making and telling compelling stories. And it's not just him, it's Passport Visions, it's Jason Lightfoot, it's B. Rose China, probably one of the worst, and many, many more. But the main reason this kind of content annoys me is not the low quality, the outright lies, or the total lack of knowledge, which are almost inevitable to a degree. It is the complete lack of empathy. Yes, your fruit tastes sweet, and it was delivered to your door for the equivalent of a few US dollars. And really, everything is cheaper. But why? And how did it get there? There's a different creator who seems like a genuine and decent guy. I think his name is Hanabi Hassani something. And he did a video. He was a Schwarzman scholar trying to make it work in China for a couple of years, couldn't, and moved back to New York City and had a reverse kind of culture shock and made a video asking why is everything in New York a little bit worse. And he wasn't, for the record, talking about the sort of right-wing talking points you see emanating often from Chinese state media or state-sponsored creators, those totally made-up things about, like, no-go zones of cities and, other fantasies. He was talking really about the conveniences of daily life. And what had really happened is that in moving geographies, the thousands of miles from China to America, he had also moved up and then back down the social economic hierarchy. In both places, China and America, he was living as a black man, so suboptimal conditions, of course, but in China, he was just much wealthier relative to general population. Back in America, he was much closer, in my view, to the delivery drivers or the intelligent human beings that cut up and peel the fruit and could feel that distance shrink because he could not benefit from that labor in the same way. These are my words, not his, and for reasons of language and culture or general propinquity, it often happens that there's a sort of mystification contra Max Weber that people don't quite understand that this is what is happening when they move between China and the United States. To be clear, I am a great beneficiary of this system. I can enter and leave the country freely. I can work legally in a way that's not even tied to a single employer. I have been hosted and cared for by some of the most recognizable institutions in China. And yes, I enjoy eating my pre-peeled pomelo, for which I pay only a pittance. But let's have the courage, the honesty that Mr. Liu had almost 80 years ago to acknowledge publicly what all of this is based on. Those sweet fruits, the towering skyscrapers, the wonderful middle-class luxuries of modern China are created by struggling, hard-working people who are invisible in all of this, in the mystification that we benefit from and enjoy. When people imagine the past and conceive history in terms of kings and queens and glories, I sometimes want to say, fuck no and fuck you, because from behind the veil of ignorance, how would you be born? You would be a peasant wearing burlap, illiterate and dirty. And so it is the stony hearts that bother me so much about that content and the lack of empathy for these people, the childcare workers, the delivery drivers. And I'll end my rant by saying maybe it would be a better place, a better society, if we found a way to care for these people better and provide for them more so that no one had to leave Omelas. And I could either pay more or peel my own damn pomelo.